kind of mid-90s, we got to the point where we could catch our breath, and we, hadn't really been involved with the homebrew community very much. And all the really interesting, cutting-edge things come out of that community. Brewers are doing their own R&D all the time, and we do, but really it's those guys, that community that really pushes the envelope.
Because they're passionate about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're, and
they really are.
The last thing that they have to worry about is selling a beer at the end of the day. So they're doing just, really interesting things.
From the studios of KINK Radio, it's the Portland 50, a podcast series about the people who dreamt, built, and championed the innovation, growth, and uniqueness of Portland.
The Portland 50 series is brought to you by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, two iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution serving our community since 1950. I'm your host, Peggy LaPointe. Today, I talk with Kurt and Rob Widmer, founders of Widmer Brothers Brewing and creators of the first American-style Hefeweizen.
We were homebrewers, and we had different motivations. I lived in Germany in the mid-'70s, and we had always liked beer, and when I was in Germany, I kind of saw how integrated into almost everything in Germany beer is, in a very positive way. And plus, I liked the beers that I was drinking over there. So when I came back, it's like maybe I can brew some of the beers that I was drinking over there, but it was also just a fun hobby. Mm-hmm. And when we started, we didn't have aspirations to take it beyond the hobby stage. I didn't.
Yeah, no. Our Uncle Walter, old Swiss guy, he was a home brewer, and growing up when we would have family dinners over there, that's where I was introduced to homebrew, and that's But like Kurt said, there was no aspiration to take it any further than I thought it was kind of a cool thing that he was doing, and but it was years later that I had the opportunity to homebrew with a guy, and then one thing led to another, and it's a very simple process, and you can do it with a spaghetti pot and your stove, and to do it well.
That's a whole nother thing.
It takes a little bit more, but not a lot.
It was 1984 when you quit your day jobs.
Correct.
The 5-year span, what went on there that you thought this could really be something?
We actually never homebrewed together. Rob was in Big Sky in Seattle, and I was here in Portland, but we both talked about it, and it was a fun hobby. And it was, the story from my standpoint of Widmer Brothers is basically a hobby that went out of control, But over that 5-year span, it seemed to me, maybe it was just from my perspective, but it seemed to me that there was a growing interest in beer in Portland. Mm-hmm. And I would point to more interest in imports at that date. So something beyond what the major domestics were doing. And so there was kind of an evolution of this is a fun hobby, and then my wife saying, I'm tired of you ruining my kitchen. She didn't ever say that. No, she was always supportive. I don't know, from Rob's perspective, but it was just at some point, the 4th or 5th year of homebrewing, it was like, I wonder if we could take this to the next level, which was very simple, small scale operation, commercial.
Do you think the interest in imports was mostly a Portland thing, or do you know if it was happening in other areas of the country?
It was happening in other parts of the country, but two of the things when I did my very rudimentary primitive research before we started, one was that Oregon was one of the top, from a percentage of beer sales, states in the country, the percentage of beer that was draft, and the industry considered draft beer drinkers more sophisticated than just people that drink out of the bottle. And Oregon was one of the top. And the other thing was that and this is in the 70s, but that Oregon was percentage of sales that was import was also one of the highest in the country, which was really surprising because on the East Coast they had that tradition of bringing over European beers. But we took two of those things as kind of very encouraging. We intended to be draft only, so that was a big plus for us. So.
It was a number of years before you started bottling it.
It was. Yeah. It was.
We were one of the last.
10 years, I think. Yeah.
And the first two beers that you were brewing was an alt beer and a Weizen beer.
Mm-hmm. So the inspiration for the alt was it's basically a German ale, but it gets cold lagered, so it's kind of a hybrid. Mm-hmm. It's cold lagered like a Pilsner. Or anyhow, our mother's family was from Dusseldorf, and alt beer is the king of beers in Dusseldorf. So there was kind of a natural connection there. So.
Right. And then the story behind Hefeweizen is pretty cool.
It is cool. I mean, we would love to say it was part of a meticulous plan, well thought out, but the alt beer was way too bitter for Portland in 1985.
Still.
It still is. The pundits say that it's the best beer that we do. I mean, consistently, it's the best beer that we do. It's kind of brewer's favorite. Rob's my favorite, but it never sold very well. But fortunately, we had a second recipe waiting in the wings, and that was a filtered wheat beer. Weizen means wheat in German. At that time in Portland, in the U.S., we felt that the beer should look like what people were accustomed to. So clear, pale, and moderately carbonated. But we had a good friend, a good account, Carl Simpson at Dublin Pub, Carl and Kate, and he had the alt beer on tap and lied to us and said it was one of his best sellers. And he said, could and then he had the Weizen beer on tap, and that sold very well. And then he asked, could we get him a third beer? And with our equipment, it really was not possible to do a third beer. And so I don't know whether to credit Rob or myself or both of us, but we just thought about putting the Weizen in a keg without running it through the filter first. And it looked like what it looked like,
Right.
And we were very concerned. This was very early days, and what would people think? So we didn't really put our name on it. We didn't have any backup materials for it. It was only supposed to be for him. Mm-hmm. And we told him what we did, and that it was not unsafe, it was just because of the appearance. And he embraced it totally. He was one of the first people in town to have those big 23-ounce Weizen beer glasses.
Oh, yeah.
I think he might have been the first.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we said, put a lemon on the rim, and he thought that was the neatest thing. So he'd have staff load up a tray, whether they had an order for him or not, and just walk through the room. And that's one of the cool things about Portland that might be unique to Portland. People would look at that and say,
What is that?
let me try that.
Yeah.
And in other parts of the country, they'd go, oh, my God, there's something seriously wrong here. Get that away from me. And in Portland, it was like, let me try that. Unfortunately, they liked it,
It's kind of funny now. Hazy beers are kind of the rage.
Right.
And brewers in the Northeast are kind of claiming that they've invented this kind of thing. It's like, wait a minute, we've been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah.
So,
I think, if I can brag on us a little bit, I think we made the world safe in the U.S. for unfiltered beers. I mean, we're out in front of that whole era of overprocessed foods and things like that.
Right.
This was one step that we don't do. And people were like, "Wow, that must be even more natural," And so
We were the experiments.
Yeah.
it was interesting. I mean, when we started, though, people expected beer to be clear, and we were trying to make our beer clear, but our filter was not. The filter we had was a piece of junk.
Hey, wait.
And so it would be hazy, and people thought that meant the beer was bad. I mean, people would call and say, something's wrong with your beer, and we'd quiz them a little bit, and they wouldn't even taste it. Mm-hmm. And so we were, the prospect of putting out Hefe that looks like it does was kind of scary to us. So, but it was so hazy. And then, like Kurt said, Carl Simpson and Kate at the Dublin Pub explained to people that it was supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
But that was the cool thing, was that it shocked people. Like Kurt said, I was in there one Friday night, and Carl said, watch this. And he had, this waitress walk around the room with these glasses, and I could see they were in conversation, and the conversation would stop, and I could see them gesturing, and like by midnight, everybody in the room was drinking it.
Oh,
It was unreal.
It was such a cool era. I mean, if you think about it, nobody had seen a glass like that.
Right.
Pint glasses were just becoming. It used to be when I started drinking beer, and you ordered a beer, you got it, 10, 12 ounce.
Small
yeah.
yeah.
And pint glasses were becoming kind of cool, schooners, and then but nobody had ever seen, the traditional Weizen beer glass, the 23-ounce Pilsner glass. I mean, they'd seen them, but
Not as
and then
common.
nobody had ever seen a beer that looked like that,
And with a lemon wedge in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was, and that's one of the things that we found out about Portland as we spread out geographically was people were so receptive to something new. I mean, they didn't have to see it on TV advertised, or it was just, I'm happy to, and when we would offer a free sample, nobody would turn us down. But
No.
There's some parts in the U.S.
Really?
We would offer people a free sample, and they're like, no, I'm not interested. It's like, you're not interested in a free sample. You got a beer in front of you.
Right.
You're not interested in just a taste, you know?
Tasting it.
Nope, not interested.
Not as adventurous. Well,
And I tell you, that is when you're a little fledgling company and you don't have any money for marketing or something like that, and you can't even get people to sample a free sample. Thank God we started in Portland.
Exactly.
You know?
Disheartening. Well, I think there is something about people who move to Portland or
Sure.
are from Portland.
Absolutely.
There's the adventure part of
Yeah.
it.
There is absolutely.
And especially in the 80s and early 90s when Portland wasn't Portland.
Hey, we're natives. It's always been Portland.
I'm almost a native. 89.
Yeah, you're pretty close.
I'm pretty close.
Yeah.
So then you started bottling. Were you just bottling the Hefeweizen then? You were bottling all three?
Oh,
Or did
that's
you
a
have
good
more
question.
at this point?
Yeah, we must have. I think we had 4.
It's 96.
Yeah.
Wow.
So because we don't pasteurize, we had to wait for the technology of bottling equipment to kind of catch up to our needs so that we could bottle sanitary and not have to pasteurize. So the technology caught up to our needs, and also we could finally afford it. But anyhow, yeah, it was 96 when we started. So we were 10 years that we were draft only. We were the largest draft only brewery in the Western Hemisphere. True.
Because you had to be. And so you had to stay pretty localized, right? Could you ship that out?
We were sending mostly. Yeah, I mean our market was Portland, you know, and then the Oregon, and then the Northwest.
I mean, the late 80s, early 90s, Hefe was it was crazy. And part of we wanted to have a pub earlier than we did. We wanted to do other things, but we were so busy just trying to keep up with the demand. And I mean, for our sales guys, everybody did everything. But I remember we just had a list by the phone. Pubs would call us. This is pre-computer and everything. So we would say, you are 30th, on the list, and we'll get you beer just as soon as we possibly can. And it was just a crazy time. It was all we could do
to keep up.
Just to keep up with Hefe.
Were you traveling back and forth to Germany
No.
to tweak anything? Or
I toured the breweries around Freiburg, which is southwest Germany, and through family, I went up to Dusseldorf, spent some time with what I consider the premier alt beer brewery there in Dusseldorf, and he gave us permission to use his yeast, which was kind of critical going forward. But that was it. It was a tour that lasted about 3 weeks, and then Rob and I had been putting the brewery together and were ready to fire it up as soon as the yeast arrived, which was interesting in itself. 2 yeast strains arrived in little pint aluminum screw-top containers, sealed, and it said something like Bio Live, and customs freaked out. It was, what the? I mean, this is in the it was before terrorism.
right.
But they were like, they called and said, your shipment has arrived. And I said, what is that? And they said, you need to come out here and explain to us what's going on in these containers. And it was like, I said, yes, it's yeast, and it is alive. It's not been killed. And they were like, so what are we going to unleash if we open these up? And it was like, they're not going to come flying out. We're going to use it to produce beer. And they're like, I mean, I got to be sympathetic for these guys.
Right.
This is not something that happened to them every day. And it was very tenuous. They were like, we're not sure that we can release this, because from their perspective, I was ready to unleash
Germs, like a
germs,
right?
Measles, and the documentation came from Weinsteffen, which they had never heard of. It went back and forth for a while. I don't even remember how I finally convinced them, but it was tenuous there for a while whether they were going to let us have our yeast. Rob and I went through just an incredibly steep learning curve in the early days. The local OLCC people were being very cooperative and very supportive, and so were the ATF guys nationally. But they all said, guys, we have experience closing breweries. I mean, if you think about it, we have no experience opening breweries. So we'll work with you on this, but we're going through a learning curve too. And it was, I mean, yeah, no, but people were being very supportive. It wasn't like anyone said, okay, we're not going to do this.
Right. They just had no idea what
it was. They had no idea. They were finding out. I mean, we would get documentation like this was before the interweb. We would get, go to the library and get documentation, and I'd say, well, what about this item, and they'd say, oh, hadn't considered that before, and I was like, so anyhow, the good news was that they wanted it to happen. They were sorting it out with us at the same time.
It's funny that Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the agency that regulated us, they had these documents. You had to keep track of, I assumed, every drop of beer. And the documents were set up for these huge breweries that brewed, tens of thousands of barrels. And so when we would draw samples, I would pour the samples into a 5-gallon bucket, and at the end of the day, use a measuring cup. And I would account for every drop. And so on these forms, I would be putting in figures like 0.00000005 or something. And there were no whole numbers. It was all just these. And I remember at one point, I would send these things out and they just disappear into the ether. But years and years later, someone did say they would get these forms and they go, "What is going on here?" Like they would round to the nearest, maybe not even barrel, which is 31 gallons, and I was measuring.
It was,
super cautious.
We were super
cautious.
cautious.
It was the Fed. I was afraid they'd kick our door down.
It paid off in the end because, Rob literally was accounting for every drop, and federal and state tax was based on your volume. And so they didn't want any beer going out the door that wasn't taxed.
Right.
It's self-reporting. But they would come down and they could verify that by, looking at how much grain you used. In theory, this is how much beer you should be able to produce on that. And so they would look and they'd say, "God, yeah, your record keeping is meticulous, but it's like, to Rob's point, we've not seen anybody measure down to the microscopic level, But they accepted that we were being conscientious
and very honest. Very honest.
And that paid off at the end, and that with all the agencies that regulated us, and it's a very regulated industry. Over the years, they came to realize that the last thing that Rob and I wanted to do was cheat on our taxes, know. And so they would, there would be things that would occur, and they'd, for example, a bad batch of beer, and you just dump it down the drain, and you have to account for that.
Right.
And they took us at our word, and they didn't come in and say, "Oh no, we have to watch you destroy this" or something like that, And so it paid off that we developed this trust, So
good.
It was. I hope that somebody got a kick out of Rob's measurements at the end, though. He was so diligent about it.
Along the way, you really had nobody in the U.S. that was doing what you were doing that you could ask questions of. They're the big breweries, but was there anyone around?
There were some. We developed a nice relationship with the brewers at Blitz. Well, for example, the device to measure bitterness is a fairly sophisticated and expensive piece of equipment, and we didn't have that. And so Rob and I just did an extrapolation of the hop bitterness as we got it from the lab. This is how bitter our beer is. And we were only off by about 100%, but anyhow, we gave samples to the Blitz guys, and they were so fascinated with what we were doing. They really were, and very supportive. And their marketing people even said, "These guys are really good for beer because they're creating an awareness of beer that was missing."
Yeah.
But they took the samples and put it in their lab and said, "Tell us what the bitterness is here." The lab was like, "Where the F are you getting this? And are you kidding me? And we don't really have a scale for this, I remember well, so what would you guess it is? It was like, we thought we were down around 40 IBUs, and it turned out it was 70 or something like that. Anyhow, they got a kick out of that.
Okay, so let's go on to the homebrew. So this is 98 that you got involved with.
Yeah, Oregon Brew Crew.
There we go.
Before Kurt and I got started, we were members of the Brew Crew, so back around 80. And then once we got the brewery going, we were busy. You talked about trips to Germany and stuff. We didn't really, I was thinking about that, but it was a good thing that we were young because it was really long days and 7 days a week. The beer didn't take a holiday ever. But kind of mid-90s, we got to the point where we could catch our breath, and we, hadn't really been involved with the homebrew community very much. And all the really interesting, cutting-edge things come out of that community. Brewers are doing their own R&D all the time, and we do, but really it's those guys, that community that really pushes the envelope.
Because they're passionate about it.
Yeah, they're, and
they really are.
The last thing that they have to worry about is selling a beer at the end of the day. So they're doing just, really interesting things. So now when you homebrew, you can go to the homebrew supply house and get all the ingredients you need, including yeast made for homebrewing. And back then, that was not really available. And so to have a quantity of yeast, we call it pitchable, or it's a quantity that you can put right in a homebrew. We always had tons of that. So we would get guys from the club calling, saying, hey, I'm going to brew on the weekend. Can I come by and get some yeast? And we'd say, sure. And then finally it was like, hey, we wanted to see what our yeast was capable of. So we would say, hey, why don't you bring, we want a bottle of the beer that results from this. And some of the beer was really good. And I'm not really sure how it came together, but we were like, we need to do something here. There are these recipes that need to be brewed. So Collaborator was born. And basically it's the members of the Oregon Brew Crew bring their recipe for 5 or 10 gallons in. We've always had a 10-barrel brew house. Now we call it our innovation brewery. But they work with our guys to ramp their recipe up to a 10-barrel batch. And then that beer is sold just in the local area under the Collaborator label.
Have any of their ideas work their way into...
Tons.
Really?
Tons. I mean, for us, which introduced us to lactose and milk sugar in brewing, which we use in other beers. Our first wit beer, our first sour beer, our first, it's called Cascadian Dark.
So the winner of this competition with the Brew Crew gets to brew with our brewers 10 barrels. Don't we contribute the profits back to the club?
So $4 a barrel goes back to the club, who in return send it to the scholarship fund for brewers at Oregon State. So it's a really cool deal.
It is a cool
win-win.
It's like a pro-am, for the home brewers. We've had maybe 50 of them since '98, men and women, and they've almost all said it was the most fun thing that they've ever done, because it is like a pro-am. They get to be a pro, and Kurt and I experienced this, and I think to a certain extent it still exists. But if you're a home brewer, even today, as sophisticated and as good as homebrew is, to your non-brewing friends, you're a hobbyist. But if the folks that go through this, they can take their friends into a pub, and their beer is on tap, and they've all said your friends look at you differently.
That's pretty cool.
So
how many? I mean, are there winners each time, or?
So it's really, there are no rules, and it's really kind of, it's morphed over the years. But what we do now is every spring we get together, members of the Brew Crew submit their beers, and we select 2 or 3 or 4, and then we brew them in the next year.
And do you have like a big announcement at the pub? Like a big showcase of
Well,
it?
so when each beer is released, so we do it kind of throughout the year. They're not all at once. We've been, last handful of years, kind of introducing them at festivals. So the Spring Beer and Wine Fest, the Oregon Brewers Festival, the Holiday Ale Fest have been 3 festivals that have been really generous in giving the Collaborative Project kind of a spotlight at those events.
You're listening to KINK's Portland 50 series. I'll continue my conversation with Kurt and Rob Widmer in a moment, but I wanted to thank our sponsor. The Portland 50 series is presented by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, 2 iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution, serving our community since 1950. Now back to my conversation with Kurt and Rob Widmer, founders of Widmer Brothers Brewing. You guys are one of the founders of the Oregon Brew Fest.
Right.
How did that come about? Was it?
So, when was the first one?
88?
I think this is going to be the 30th.
Yes, 88.
31st year. So, so 88. So, we still were, I don't want to say struggling, but we recognized that nobody had any money for advertising. And so, what could we do to create greater awareness of craft beer? Back then we were a microbrewery, but anyhow, then we became craft brewers. But anyhow, that wouldn't cost us very much. And so I think I give Art credit for coming up with the idea, Art Lawrence, but one of the founders of Portland Brewing. But anyhow, so Art and Rob and I and the Ponzis at Bridgeport, the founders of Bridgeport, got together and said, and back then, I don't even remember, but I think we leased Waterfront Park. I mean, we identified that location, and I want to say it was like $100.
To lease it?
To lease the park for the weekend. And now, well,
let me
tell you, it's
Not $100.
It's many thousands of times that now. But anyhow, and we had no idea what to anticipate. It was Saturday and Sunday only. We got a refrigerated trailer down there that we borrowed from a wholesaler. And I think we were projecting that if we got like 1,000 people over 2 days, that we'd have to consider that a success. And there was no fencing, no nothing. I abused all of my friends and said, come down and as volunteers and serve beer for, and at the end I'll buy you a beer, and it was for like noon to 6 o'clock,
right.
Something like that. And so there were no doors to open, but there was this gigantic crowd waiting, and it was so insane. It was a sunny, warm day.
In July.
Right. And we picked that because I think my wife did some research, and that's a weekend that's most consistently good weather in Portland. So we picked that, and it was an open date on the park. Well, that was probably why it was so cheap, too, because we told them we're only going to get 1,000 people. Anyhow, I think at the end we figured that we got close to 8,000 people, but it was sunny. We didn't have the truck under the trees like we do now.
Right.
All of our friends got sunburned.
Oh, no.
Instead of working like a couple hours, we made them work for like 8, and we ran out of beer like 10 times, and Rob and I kept going back to the brewery, and finally it's like we don't have any more beer, and so by Sunday we were just completely out of beer. So anyhow, it was obviously it exceeded.
It was a success.
It was a success, and it grew from there. I mean, it was. I really liked the model that we laid out then, in that there were other brewery festivals. Mm-hmm. Most of them showcased and were sponsored by big breweries,
right.
Either import or domestic, but also they were competitive. And the Oregon Brewers Festival has never been a competition.
Right.
There's no prizes awarded to anybody for anything, and it was. And we bought the beer.
Oh, geez.
For most of the festivals, it was expected that you would donate the beer because it's
right.
the showcase opportunity. We paid for it.
Oh, man.
And so, and that was very unique, and especially for the little fledgling breweries in the Northwest like ourselves, they didn't have the financial capability to just say, here are 5 kegs,
Right.
We said 5 kegs and here's the cash, and so.
Yeah, and in the early days, a lot of the brewers from outside the area used the money. We would buy the beer. They used that money to come.
Yeah, to pay for the travel expenses. Yeah. No, and so anyhow, it was a model that hadn't been tried before. Oh, and we got the as it grew larger. My friends said, okay, you can only abuse this, 1 or 2 years, and then you got to find new friends. So we went back to the brew crew and said, if you provide the volunteers for serving, we'll make this amount of dollars donation to the club. And towards the end, I guess it's still, we're not involved really anymore, but at the end they were supplying, several hundred servers.
I have friends who volunteer for the Brew
Several
Fest.
hundred servers,
Yeah.
and I think all they get out of it is maybe a T-shirt.
Yeah, and beer.
Well, yeah,
and
beer.
And
Yeah.
beer.
And that's really all
I think
it
it's,
takes.
and they don't abuse. I think it's pretty fun. I mean, if it's
Everybody has a good
And the
time.
nice thing is a lot of the servers are really knowledgeable. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it evolved. I mean, just like everything for us in craft brewing, I mean, fabulous success, but...
All the beer fests are pretty successful
that
are in Portland.
They are. I mean,
So
we're such a unique location.
It's interesting to me, kind of with our Germanic roots and Oktoberfest in Germany and the beer halls and things, there still really isn't a big... There's Mount Angel.
Right.
But I think there's an opportunity there to have there used to be one, the Rhinelander folks, Horst Mager did one at Oaks Park that I thought was really,
Ever go
really
to that?
good.
I never
think it
went
was
to
maybe
that one.
too successful.
Very
The neighborhood
proud.
association didn't like it very well.
Mm.
Yeah.
But then Central Catholic High used to do one at Holiday Park, right by Lloyd Center. It was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, there isn't really one big Oktoberfest.
So you guys got a few months to get that going.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I want to talk about something else that I didn't know about. That, of course, makes me want to buy more of your beer because sustainability is a big passion of mine. But you guys do a lot with sustainability.
We do.
And was something I was totally unaware of. So a couple of things that you guys have got going on. It's the CO2 recovery program.
Yeah.
And tell me about that, because I can read the words, but I don't necessarily understand.
So typically a brewery, when you're fermenting, that you ferment CO2 and you vent that to atmosphere. But when you get to kind of our size, the piece of equipment that you can use to capture that CO2 becomes kind of economical. And Sierra Nevada does it, but I think we're the second on the West Coast. I think there's probably only a handful of craft brewers that are doing it, so we're very proud of it. And we have a wonderful sustainability director, Julia Person. You know, greenhouse gases are front and center, again, with cap and trade. And, we have this really cool device at the brewery we'd really like to show off.
I don't know if anybody, since the big breweries in the Northwest, Blitz, Rainier, Olympia, they're all gone.
Right.
So I don't know that there's anybody that's doing CO2 capture.
Sierra?
In the Northwest.
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
How hard is it?
It's not that difficult, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, the equipment.
Right.
And we would look at it, our engineers looked at it like 5 years ago, and they said, at our size, the payback would be like 15 years, which doesn't make sense for most businesses.
Right.
So, but as we've grown, we got closer and closer, and the equipment has gotten not less expensive, but more efficient. I think I heard that we may even be able to sell it, our excess.
I think we're going to have more than we need, so we'll be able to supply.
Because we were buying it.
Right.
Like Rob said, with the equipment that we had, we were just venting it. We didn't have a way to capture it. And now we capture it, but we were buying CO2. Tanker would come in.
Because you use it for the carbonization and packaging.
No, not necessarily.
No?
Most of our carbonation is natural, but every now and then you have to add just a little bit to hit very specific numbers. But also when you're moving from tank to tank, you don't want to use air because that oxidizes the beer.
Okay.
So as you're taking beer out of a tank, for example, that space that you're creating in the tank, you fill with carbon dioxide. It's not terribly expensive, but it's part of the process. But it's kind of fun that you might want to talk to Julia. She's very knowledgeable, and she's dedicated to sustainability.
Yeah, I have to brag on her a little bit. When she came on board, you know, she really kind of did a deep dive on everything that we do, and it's been unreal, the things that she's uncovered.
I think at one point, not too long ago, we were the most efficient user of water, maybe even in the United States.
Yes, you either are or were a leader for the beer ratio because you're using 3.77 gallons per gallon of beer. What's the average?
Oh, I think it's close to 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's a lot of guys who don't even really measure it.
Well, on a small scale, that puts us up against the big guys, you know, and so, we're pretty proud of that. You know?
Absolutely.
And we didn't have to do that. I mean, honestly, Portland water's
we're in a great spot. It's beautiful brewing water and pretty plentiful.
And I mean, Bull Run, I mean, that's one of the things, if Rob and I, we could claim to being really smart, but it was just coincidence that we landed in a place that has such wonderful brewing water. So,
well, and those are the big things. I mean, some of the smaller things that you're doing, or maybe it's Julia.
It's all Julia.
We'll give it. We're good.
Well, we're good Portlanders. I mean, we wanted to do those things, but a lot of them we didn't know what we didn't know. Right. And it wasn't until Julia came on board that we.
She's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, the reusable containers for employee meals, which is fantastic. 13,000 spent grains go to local farmers. Yep. That's 99.5% of your waste diverted.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
Brewing is pretty clean.
Yeah.
You know, most of our is edible. You know, has farm use. So and it was just that last little bit of the stream that Julia really has.
Try to use pallets over and over.
And you guys are founding members of the Oregon Brew Shed Alliance, which is pretty cool. Brewers and conservationists all advocating for protection of Oregon's forests and watersheds. And the watersheds obviously make sense because you're using the water. And so you guys can take credit for that, or you can give it to Julia.
We'll give it to Julia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, and while we're on the topic of sustainability, I have to give my wife credit for that. This is a big topic for her, and she said it's not necessarily sustainability from a resource management standpoint, but it must be sustainable from a financial standpoint.
Right.
You can't just do things because they're the right thing to do and have them lose money constantly. Yeah. And so Julia's been really good about identifying cost savings that also create opportunities for sustainability too. So.
Right.
But also we put a tank in that's devoted exclusively to spent yeast, a small portion of beer that's remaining in the tank before we clean it. That goes to this tank. I think it's a 15,000 gallon tank, and we have a farmer that comes in with his tanker and collects that because it's very nutritious for watering his livestock. Yeast is very nutritious.
Yeah, that's true.
And so is beer, actually. And so there's a small amount of alcohol, but he just dumps it in the open troughs, and the cows love it. And it's there's vitamins there,
right,
and minerals and everything else. So,
I love that.
Yeah, we didn't always have that capability, but 10 years ago.
Yeah, the brewers that aren't kind of adjacent to rural areas where there are livestock, it's tough. It's like in New York City, I think they have to.
Oh, what they pay?
Have it. It's
what
landfill.
they pay to have it removed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like.
And then all that food, essentially, nutrition goes to the landfill.
Yeah. Well, no, and it's actually it's a revenue source for us now. I mean, farmer comes in and he pays us half of what he would pay for feed.
That's fantastic.
And so he's happy to get it.
Exactly.
And we're happy that he reliably takes it away, So it's been good.
Last year, I wish I had known about this, and I hope you're going to tell me that you're doing it again. You had the, across the street, the food cart pods.
Yeah, our beer garden,
yes,
finally.
The beer garden.
Yeah.
Are you
we are going to continue to do that.
Good.
They're experimenting with which food cart to have there. Rob and I have always loved a beer garden.
Yeah.
A nice warm evening, sitting in a beer garden with friends, drinking beer, doesn't get much better than that.
No, it really doesn't.
So, yes, we're going to continue to do that.
We've made some big changes to our pub, and that's really the food now, is that they're going to get kind of a rotation of food carts there. So,
what's on the horizon? New
something
seasonals?
Fun that we're doing with Hefeweizen. But we've been around long enough. We're of a size that for hop growers, we're a good customer. We've got long, 33-year relationships. And so as new hop varieties come available, actually even before they're available, we have kind of agreements to get them so we can test brew with them. Because the growers want to know what they've got too. And so we're going to do a series of beers, we call it the Hefe X series. And so we're going to be featuring kind of these new varieties of hops.
Same sort of recipe?
Same recipe with Hefe, but we tried this some years ago. I thought it was a brilliant idea.
So did I.
We call it the Rotator IPA series. And it was going to be the same thing, that it was going to rotate 3 or 4 times a year, same recipe but with a different variety of hop. And we couldn't communicate it. People didn't get that the hop rotated.
We confused people.
Yeah, it was a mess. It was too bad, because I really thought IPAs were super popular, or it was just the start.
Right.
And everybody wanted the latest, greatest, and we were kind of uniquely positioned to be able to do it.
We realized
we just couldn't.
People would say, I love your rotator, and we'd say, oh, really? Which one? And you get that panic look on the face. It's like, yeah. Well, where did you have it? So, I mean, we were confusing people, and that's not a good thing.
No, it's
it
not. It
becomes negative pretty fast.
Right.
So, yeah.
Do you source your hops all in Oregon?
No,
all over. Mostly Oregon, Washington.
Okay.
But we're happy to take them.
We get a fair amount from New Zealand. My wife and I had the occasion to be there and stopped off at Nelson, New Zealand. That's where their hop research station is. And we met the farmer, or the father of the Nelson hop, which is this professor down there, a really nice guy. But anyhow, to Rob's point, we source our hops from all over the world. And New Zealand is especially interesting because it's been isolated from the mainland, whatever that would be, I guess Australia, for so many years, million years, that they don't have the bugs that can infest hop fields, so they don't have to use any herbicides.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. No sucker control, no herbicides, and so they are the only source, in my opinion, in the world for organic hops.
Really?
Truly organic hops. Other countries make that claim because they haven't, but these guys have never used herbicides. So yeah. Anyhow, it's the herbicides are all FDA approved,
right,
and they're only applied way before harvest, so it's not anything that ever gets into the beer, even close to the beer. Anyhow, it's fascinating. I mean, craft brewing has caused a renaissance in hop growing and research. I mean, it was an industry that was, because the big breweries were using fewer and fewer and fewer hops and fewer varieties, and the acreage in planted in hops was spiraling down and down and down. We watched that over the years, and then when craft brewers came online in the U.S., and there's been kind of an emergence in other countries around the world, but all of a sudden, I mean, just in Oregon alone, I think they added like 10% more acreage in hop production, which is a big number.
Yeah, big number.
But all over the world where they grow hops, we can take credit for inspiring.
And it's pretty neat to see because they grow up really tall.
Hops are wonderful.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. I mean, on the right conditions, they'll grow 12 to 18 inches a day.
They do because we planted some. And
Good.
I was like, holy cow.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They grew all the way up really quickly.
Did you build a trellis farm? Or?
We have a trellis over our porch.
Oh,
and
great.
so we had grown them
perfect.
to provide some shade on
Perfect.
one side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
They were
Sometimes
crazy.
people are surprised by how heavy they get.
Yeah. And sticky.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Very sticky.
So a friend of ours has a hop farm, Goshi Farms. So she was growing low trellis, just on an experimental basis on her farm. And when she was done with that research, she said anybody that wants to come down and pick, because her equipment was for the high trellis.
Right.
She didn't have equipment for low. So she said if anyone wants to come down and pick off the low trellis, you're welcome as much as you want. So we got 10 volunteers from the brewery to go down there, and they'll just slash you up. The hops are they'll
Yes.
cut you. I mean, we had gloves.
Yes.
But I mean, it was kind of hilarious because like 10 people in 4 hours picked enough hops for a batch of beer. Barely.
So you're entering your fourth decade, or into your fourth decade. What's you got no plans? You're just gonna see where it's gonna go?
Well, I'm effectively retired.
You're really?
Yeah. I still, I'm obviously fascinated what's going on with Widmer Brothers, and I kind of keep tabs. I still get the industry journals and stuff
Yeah.
like that emailed. But it's so pleasing to me that how Portland and Oregon and the Northwest has really led the way. To Rob's point, there are other regions that claim different things, but it's kind of revisionist history. I mean, we were there and kind of already years and years ago. But it's I think that craft brewing has, in most of the U.S., some parts of the country it's still growing really rapidly, but most of the U.S. it's just integrated itself into, the beer drinkers' list of beverages,
Absolutely.
And I don't see that going away. Yeah, I mean, the total beer sales in the U.S. has been in decline for a while, but craft continues to grow. So, and I don't know it goes to the sky, but I don't see that.
I don't see that slowing down.
Mm-mm.
No. You're not retired yet, are you, Rob?
I joke that I retired 10 years ago. I just haven't told anybody. But it's in the beer biz. How do you retire from the beer biz? you
Right.
know? But I still go in. But for me, I'm just down to the things that I really enjoy and where I think I bring value. I think my palate is still good.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we're proud of is we've had a taste panel since really forever, but we formalized it in 1990. But every batch of beer is submitted to really thousands of checkpoints along the way, but the final one has to be a quorum of panelists have to give thumbs up for every batch.
Wow.
So we meet Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock and taste the production. So I still do that.
Good.
And then I still enjoy, we call it team selling, but it's basically going out and talking to pub owners and beer drinkers. And
Right.
so I do that. Not as much as I did years and years
20
ago,
years ago.
but yeah.
Well, good.
It's a fun industry. I mean, it's
really
a
is.
fun business. I mean, Rob and I aren't probably a fault is that we don't step back and take things into perspective. But I mean, to be able to take a hobby and make it a job, pretty lucky.
That's very lucky.
And we were in the right place at the right time, and I think probably it was detrimental to a lot of people because people would look at the two knothead Widmer brothers, and it's like if they can do this, anyone can do it. And I think that some people were misled a little bit by that, But it's been a heck of a lot of fun, and I don't know where else in the U.S. that there would be a better place, or that there could have been a better place than
Right.
Portland
Right.
for from the beer drinking receptivity to having wonderful brewing water, and the ingredients are all right here, the malt, the hops, and everything. I mean, I should mention too that our legislature was very supportive. I mean, they got tired of seeing Rob and I down there every session, asking for this and that and this and that. But in the end, they came through, and one of the things that I think the legislators from that time should take pride in is that, we would say we're not asking for money, we're just asking for you to remove some of these restrictions, and if you do that, we will grow this business. And last time I looked, it was something like 8,000 jobs and several $100 million, and it's been, and not asking for any money. So hopefully that there are legislators that pat themselves on the back and say, this is what we created,
Right.
and we did this without taxpayer funding,
Right.
And so they should be proud of that, and we're proud of that too, but we're very aware that there are a lot of states that legislators look at this and say, oh, alcohol is evil, we can't possibly do anything to support breweries, and that's a tough hurdle to overcome.
Right.
So, but in Oregon, we didn't have that issue. It was support all the way. So
There were enough people in Salem who had the foresight to
yeah,
see the promise of this industry.
I think well, and just the fact that we were down there not asking for money. A lot of fledgling industries, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but
Right.
people they're accustomed to people testifying, give us this money and we'll create these jobs. And we said, take away some of these restrictions that go back to Prohibition era that didn't
Right.
make any sense, and we'll create the jobs on our own, and we did.
Well, definitely luck, definitely right place, right time, but
Yep.
also hard work. I mean, yes, it's fun. Yes, it was a hobby that became your life's passion, but there was a lot of hard work in there as well.
There was.
There was.
Thank you. Yeah, there was. I won't deny that. There was. I was very fortunate to have a very supportive wife that accepted the fact that she watched her dad be an entrepreneur, and so here Rob and I working, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and no complaints. It's like she recognized that we were doing, and she was supportive the whole way, but
Right.
we were doing what it took to
make a go of it.
not go out of business. we put every penny that we had, which was not very much, plus some family pennies in it, which was also not very much. But it was like we didn't have Plan B.
Right. It had to go. It had to go.
It
Well,
had to, yeah.
I'm glad it did, and
Me too.
I'm glad you guys made it into the studio today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you so much.
This is fun being here.
Thank you for joining me for my conversation with Kurt and Rob Widmer. If you've missed any of the previous podcasts, you can find them at our website at KINK.FM. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Portland 50 podcast wherever you're listening. The Portland 50 is a podcast series celebrating KINK's 50th anniversary, and it's about the people who dreamt, built, and championed the innovation, growth, and uniqueness of Portland. The series is presented by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, two iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution serving our community since 1950.